Hey, DJ Nubis, my partner in crime, Edgar Allan Poet, the bracket buster.
Oh man, my shit is dead.
Well, that's what a lot we're going to talk about today. March Madness has been crazy. I think we talked about it last episode where the pundits were saying, man, there's like 12 or 13 teams that could win it this year. And they were probably pretty right because I didn't look at the stats about upsets in the March Madness, but the first round alone had like almost 6 to 8 different upsets, and I'm gonna go through them a little bit, talk to you a little bit about them. Even in the round of 32, we still had more upsets. So it's like even if they're not the biggest, like some of them are 8 and 9 matchups and stuff like that. But you and I were like pretty convinced in some of those matchups that the top seed was going to move on. So
Yeah, yeah. You talked about all the teams who could win it. You want to know some teams who can't win it? 3 out of my 4 picks for the final four. I got one going. I got one going.
yeah, I mean, I just thought about that because let me see. Yeah, I have two left, and I have my champion left. That's
I
it.
I had Indiana versus Kansas, and then I had Alabama defeating Kentucky, who I thought was well positioned to make a run, and for a split second it looked like they were. So fire Calipari. That we'll start there.
Let the chants begin.
I've been screaming to the mountainside. Oh.
Well, you and I also talked about because obviously I'm kind of like you because of my bias with my team, Virginia. I thought they had the talent ability to at least go a couple rounds, maybe get through there if they played their best game. But we also knew the possibility that they could not get there. And of course, Furman at number 13 beat them at the buzzer. We're pretty close to the buzzer with 2 seconds left. Keely Clark makes like the worst possible play in the history of possible plays, even though this is the same guy that made one of the best passes ever in 2019 to keep us alive versus Purdue. I was baffled. Like I was beside myself. I couldn't figure it out. Like it's like one of those things. Like I'm not shocked, but I'm shocked. They find new ways to just stab me over and over, like I'm in a movie of Scream. It's just terrible.
In defense of the young man, um, I've seen. I've used this before, and I'll use it again. I watched, and this was back in like maybe 2008 or 2007 on the same weekend. I watched both Tom Brady and Peyton Manning try to throw the ball downfield, and just clang it right off the ground. So I've seen Michael Jordan airball free throw. I've seen Kobe Bryant. Like I've seen all these great players screw up spectacularly.
Right.
With that being said, it was not in a tournament setting. So I don't think that that's going to tarnish his legacy for Virginia. Um, but the person I feel the worst for is actually him because he's probably still kicking himself over it.
Oh yeah.
With this day.
He's the only one that was remaining from that championship squad. So for him to make that specific error, like at that moment, was like a gut puncher for him, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
But he's still a champion. Bennett's still a champion. I think my biggest issue with Virginia as my team is that when it comes to the tournament, like Bennett is probably the best coach we've ever had. He wins consistently throughout the year during the regular season. But for whatever reason, tournament time, we seem to be the ones that choke more than shock people. And that's sort of the thing that kind of irks me a bit.
Purdue has you beat on that.
All right, we'll get to them.
Yeah, I'll just say, at least you can go champion.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just, I love Bennett. I wouldn't change anything because it could always be a lot worse. And, I'll just deal with it. Yeah. Well, you still got through the first round. Don't feel bad.
Championship. It's been a while since we had one in Kentucky. That's what we're about. Yeah. And Anthony Davis ain't walking through those doors. That's a Rick Pitino reference.
But another big surprise, and this is probably like we always have like one Cinderella story.
Yeah, I hate.
Houston, number 15 over number 2 Arizona, which destroyed my bracket the first day. Like,
Yeah.
because I had Arizona in the championship game.
They are another team who people are marking down now as unreliable in the tournament. I cannot
Right.
tell you on Twitter how many times I've seen someone tweet something since that game along the lines of, "Every year I fall in love with Arizona, and every year they fuck me." So I will just. It's tough. Like the tournament is so brutal now. Like with respect to John Wooden, who
Hmm.
has all those championships in UCLA. I'm not saying he wasn't a great coach, and he was definitely an amazing man. And I do believe that if he were he alive today, he could adapt to the game and coach well. So I'm not taking any shots at arguably the greatest coach ever. I'm not. However, there are more rounds. There are more people who play basketball today. There are more people who are good at basketball today, and the level of scouting that you can do, the level of knowledge that you have against teams that you've never played against is higher. And it's just so brutally hard now to go out there and rack up wins. I mean, like it was always a hard sport. Like if you make the finals in the NBA and you lose, you hang the banner, yay, whatever, no one cares about it, right? If you make the final four, even if you lose in the final four, that's a big deal.
Hmm.
Like when they argue, like, is this guy a Hall of Fame? Is this woman a Hall of Fame head coach for college? They're not just counting championships. They're counting Final Fours. They
Yeah.
count Elite Eights. Even Sweet 16s make it. So
Yeah.
I'm
Their
not trying to.
tournament, conference
It's
tournaments, all that.
brutal. It's
Hmm.
so hard. And to top all of it off, you deal with the fact that it's a sport, anything can happen, officiating matters. You can also get screwed year after year in the region that you're put in. Not all regions are created equally. There's so much variance.
Oh, I had to put a guy on Twitter on blast because like he was a Duke fan who was complaining about the Tennessee game, and I'm like, dude, you guys have no room to talk about dirty play or any kind of thing like that. Because I'm like, you are.
Grayson Allen. Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah.
That's like the poster child for the shittiest, dirtiest player ever.
Hey, and he's still a scumbag in the NBA, by the
Is he
way.
really? I haven't
Yeah,
even
he's a
watched him in the
whole.
NBA, so
He is one of the most hated guys in the NBA, and he's still a scumbag. So
oh
no.
my
Oh,
gosh.
and when Coach K suspended him for like half a game or a game or something, so the NCAA wouldn't like. No one wants to hear that. No one wants to hear that. And yeah, Tennessee is a super physical team, and they test the refs. They put the pressure on the refs to blow the whistle. Okay, but
Hmm.
they've been doing that all year long. So it's not a shocker. No one wants to hear about it. Like I will agree. At the end of the game, I can usually look around and be like, for most other teams, a couple of those volunteers would have fouled out, but that's the brand of basketball that they play. They live within the margins of the rules. They're not a dirty team; they're a physical team. I think if they were a dirty team, they probably wouldn't get away with as much. Um, and you know what, Duke, like you kind of got the Patriots thing where, right or wrong, there's a perception that you guys oftentimes get whistles that you don't deserve. So people are not interested in it. They're
Yep.
not.
Yep.
Also, you played like shit in the second half, so no one wants to hear it. Like make a
Well,
basket.
I'm sitting there and I'm thinking like, look, Duke's a young team. They're going to be very good for the next 3 or 4 years. So it's like the fact they even got there is a good thing. Like I just, they weren't expected to win the
Yeah,
ACC conference tourney, so like they did,
yeah.
and yeah, I mean, like, but to sit there and have some of your fans like whine and say, "Oh, Tennessee is like the dirtiest physical team ever," I'm like, no, they're just physical. They play defense.
Yeah, they're
And
very.
I'm like sitting there saying, even if they miss calls, I'm sure it went both ways. Like I'm sure they missed calls on Tennessee as well.
We could remind our friends down in Duke of there used to be this running tab of free throw disparity
Mhm.
between Duke and a lot of teams, and at the time, the narrative from Duke fans is, well, we have outside shooters because Coach K liked to shoot the threes, but we oftentimes play physical inside, in the paint, and so that we get fouled that way. And
Yeah.
that is true. So the reverse is also true, that if you have a physical team that's playing right on that line, and the refs tend to let you play a little bit harder come tournament time, you might get that. Play some defense yourself.
Yeah, yeah, that's all it comes down to. I mean, you kind of said it. Like, there's sometimes when you have like a bad official call, like at the very last moment, those can be the ones that
Super
kind of hurt
Bowl.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
those could be the things that could hurt you the worst in terms of like, oh, they shouldn't have made that call. But basketball just doesn't really work that way. Usually, it always comes down to a last shot. You can argue this or that, but
It's
it,
and I got into it with G Money on Twitter. Not into it. I love that guy. Shout out to G Money. But I was talking about calls because the Lakers got screwed on calls so bad the NBA apologized, like, publicly. Okay.
right,
And he was tweeting, talking about like, oh man, we got a lot of calls last night, it's like we play in LA. And so I tweaked his nose and I said, like, I wish we got the calls that everybody thinks that we does, that we do. And he posted this thing about like the last 2 minutes call disparities, and the Lakers are at the top. And I said, like, that's great, but I have Anthony Davis and LeBron James on my team. Those guys get hacked all the time, no calls, because they're so big and strong. So what about the other 98% of the game? And then a lot of people, in Denver land were mad at me and went at me. I get it. I get it. No one wants to hear Lakers fans complain either, but I felt
yeah.
provoked and I was bored. But that's the reality of it. You have the entire game. And I ask people this all the time. I would Tell me if you feel this way. Okay. I will take one bad call at the end of the game, one real bad call at the end of the game, if I get the vast majority of the calls and non calls throughout the entire game.
Hmm.
I feel like that the way that it weighs, and sometimes you get screwed the entire game. And in basketball, it is probably the sport. I will give the Duke fans this. It is probably the sport, given the nature of it, where the most bad calls happen. There's the game's so fast, it's so fluid, all of that. But if you pull up Duke's shooting percentage against Tennessee, Tennessee's got a great defense.
Yeah,
They ain't that great. Like make
right,
a three
right, right.
pointer. Like hit
Oh
them.
no, who was it they said? Because we didn't get to the game, but
Yeah.
Pittsburgh beat Iowa State, and Iowa State was terrible,
Mm-hmm.
terrible on offense.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, sometimes you're just a victim of your own undoing.
Yeah.
But I
Like
was gonna say, like, if you remember, like the game against Texas Tech in the national championship game, there was a controversial play where Ty Jerome bounced the basketball off his foot, which would have constituted a double dribble that was never called. But like total class, Bennett said the same thing I had been saying the entire time: is if you're watching that play, the defender actually grabs Ty Jerome by the jersey before that happens, and it's not called. So if people are going to complain about the non double dribble call, I'm going to say, well, they didn't call the foul either.
there you
So
go.
to me, it's a wash. No one got anything
What
out of that.
I watched the '96 Kentucky championship game last night. Okay, they played against Syracuse, and it was a hell of a game. There is a play where they're going for alley oop. They being Syracuse, where the guy throws the ball up. I want to say it was Collins for Syracuse, goes up to dunk it. The ball, he throws up this loop, alley oop rather, that actually it's a made shot, but he touches the ball when it's in the cylinder.
Yeah.
Those are 3 points that should not have happened. Everybody went nuts over it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Kentucky would get up by 13 and then be back by 4, back by 5, back by 6. At one point it got, within 2, and then you get up by 10. And the entire time I'm watching this, and I'm like, I remember watching this with my dad. My dad was apoplectic, because he was just absolutely just simmering in rage and rancor, because he graduated from University of Kentucky, and as a immigrant, he latched on to a lot of like American traditions.
Right.
Basketball was king in Kentucky, so
Oh yeah.
basketball became, that was his shit, and he loved Rick Pitino. Um, Kentucky won. Like it's hard to it's hard to, like, when you're like double dribble foul, what would happen? 3 points. Like we know that what the result was of that screw up. 3 points. All three of them. And the way that shot went in, the way that it was alley-ooped, there was no way to defend it either. If it was a more accurate oop and a, less shitty 3-point shot, I guess, that's the reality of the situation. You hit the point where even if it's a little slanted towards the other way, and it's not because of bias. If it's because of bias, it's a whole different problem.
Right.
Overcome something. You
Yeah.
go back and watch old Super Bowls, old championship games. Oftentimes, you see the team who won get hosed a little.
Mhm.
Just is what it is. No
Yep.
whining, Dookies. No whining,
No wine. This is a no wine zone.
especially for Dookies.
Okay, so the next 3 games of the first round, Auburn over Iowa. We picked Iowa, but again, it's an 8-9 matchup. It could have gone either way. Auburn actually played pretty well against Houston, so they lost, but they played pretty well. I could have went either way with that matchup, really, but I chose Iowa at the time.
I went with Auburn. I didn't
Oh, you
feel
did?
great
Okay.
about it. Yeah, I went with Auburn. And I didn't feel great about it, so I was right. That's rare when you look at my bracket.
And then you had Pittsburgh, who had to do a play-in game and beat Iowa State. We talked about Iowa State; they kind of shot themselves in the foot by not shooting at all very well. So, but Pittsburgh played pretty well too. I forget who they lost in the next round, but they looked pretty good in their loss in the second round. So they were.
Xavier.
That's right. Yeah,
Xavier pulled away at the end, and Xavier's a real good team.
Yeah,
So
they are.
there's
They are.
no shame in that.
And then Penn State over Texas A&M. We didn't really see that coming. In fact, I thought that Penn State was really only relied on those guards, but apparently they had played very well as a team. They really did a good job there.
I picked Penn State because I thought A&M was overrated. I did not see, as I look at I remember when I made at my bracket, I did not see such a beating. I thought it was going to be a close game.
Yeah, they walloped.
Yeah, they really beat the brakes off of those boys, and that's rough.
And then the last 2 games, the first one was Florida Atlantic over Memphis. I didn't know much about Florida Atlantic, so again, it's a 9-8 matchup, so they're kind of even, I guess, in that way. But I had Memphis at least going a couple rounds, so that really fucked my racket there with that one. And then the final one, no one saw coming. Fairleigh Dickinson over Purdue, number 1. The second time a 16 seed beat a number 1 to join Virginia. And I got a special guest here who wants to explain why the Virginia loss is not as bad as this one.
Defining moment. Yeah. It tells you what March Madness is all about.
Yes, indeed.
What we're talking about is for the second time in history this has happened. Let's go back to 2018. UMBC beat Virginia. UMBC, the 16 seed, Virginia number 1, 74-54, decisive.
And it looked a lot like in terms of the inability to contain the ball handlers for UMBC. There were multiple guys that were able to attack off the dribble, create rotations, and have Virginia chasing them and chasing the game, and they never could catch up.
I don't count that one as a 16-1. I really don't. No disrespect, because Virginia won the championship the next year. You know why? Because they had the best player in the country who plays for the Hawks now, DeAndre Hunter. He didn't play.
Yeah, he was out.
He didn't play in that game.
That's a fact.
So you take a guy who was the best player in college, who's in the NBA now, who I love as a player for the Atlanta Hawks. He comes back the next year. They go from losing to a 16 seed to winning the whole thing.
Well, you gotta count it, but you just have to put an asterisk by it. That's what you got to count it.
Was actually the number 1 seed, because they were pretty much number 1 a couple times this year.
Yep.
This was a huge upset.
Damn right, Charles. Damn right, sir.
That is first off, hearing Charles Barkley say anything about winning is hilarious to me, because he's one of the greatest losers in basketball history. And it's fair for me to bring that up, since he likes to bag on other guys who play now in the NBA about how their rings don't mean anything.
Oh, well, that's funny you say that. I mean, have you heard some of the shit that JJ Redick says?
Yeah, I have opinions on JJ Redick too. Yeah. And sometimes I agree with him. So I agree with them sometimes. That would be too tangential.
So do you not think that's a valid argument though? Because I never really considered that.
Fuck no. Because okay, they had Hunter, who was a stud. You know what else they had? 4 other players than their starters that were better than the 4 best players on the team that they were playing. They had a head coach who's one of the better head coaches in basketball versus who's the head coach of the team that beat them that year. Exactly. Like, I'm not trying to hear that mess. We didn't have our best player. So are we truly to believe that in no other 1 versus 16 settings that none of those teams had a star player out?
I think I agree with the other commentator when you said that you have to count it, but you have to have an asterisk by it.
No.
Yeah,
asterisk.
I think so. I think that works for me. That works very well for me.
Of course it works for you. Listen, you want to know why there's no asterisk there? Because going into that game, let's be honest, you know your guy's out. Who did you think was going to win that game?
Virginia.
Okay. If you had to bet it, who were you going to bet on?
Virginia.
Who did Vegas have?
I think the worst thing about that too was that Virginia was actually the top number one seed. Of all the number ones, they were the number 1 seed.
Exactly. So this was not a team like, okay, the year that Carmelo played in college.
Right.
They had some guys who were pretty good, but that team, that was Carmelo's team.
Oh,
okay?
Of course. Carmelo, but see, those kind of cases like Carmelo or say even Steve Francis,
yeah,
they're not the normal thing. So.
No, but that's exactly my point. If it's a one-man team like Davidson, where it's literally Steph Curry and a bunch of scrubs who tried to play defense or something, then yeah, okay. But none of those teams were the number 1 overall dominant-looking team. So if you wanted to say they got into the second round, let's change the facts. They got into the second round and then they lost to like a 12 seed or a 9 seed or a 10 seed. Okay, maybe they're underseeded, maybe they're still out, maybe matchups. That's more understandable to me. But a 1 to 16, Barkley, the king of bad takes, is up there, out there, doing what he does best. Taking a gun to the head of logic and pulling the fucking trigger. He is there because he's entertaining, not because he's knowledgeable.
Hey man, like I think he's smart as hell, dude. Like he's my man.
He's great he knows how to make money.
He knows how to make Northman very happy. Is what
that's easy. That's easy to make you happy. You just yell "Go Broncos" and Atwater, and you're like,
boom! Yes. I thought I still like it a little bit. I do understand a lot of your points though, because Virginia was like they didn't have 4 other great players. They had Kyle Guy and Ty Jerome, but
they had 4 guys who were very good college players.
Oh yeah, well I mean, but like I said, I'm talking like really, it was more of a trio than anything. But yeah, I get your point. As far as the overall talent compared to UMBC, yes.
Yeah, I will close with this. Charles Barkley is there for entertainment,
which is interesting. Real quickly though, because with Purdue now this year, it's really just about their big dude, right? Yeah. Like I didn't watch him much this year, but like as far as from what I remember watching highlights, it's always been about that big dude.
They have some decent role players. Here's the thing. They are I don't want to call them a one-man team because they have other guys who are good at basketball at the collegiate level. But it's not like they have a guy who you would look at, and we've seen this before, like Sean Mays for UNC when they won a championship, U of I, right? Where it's like, he'll go pro, he'll probably not be great, or Frank the Tank from Wisconsin from like 8 years ago, something like that, where it's like, this guy will not be dominant in the NBA, but he's a very dominant college player to go with another superstar. Purdue, they were overrated, and the stat is something like this is the 3rd straight year they've lost to a 12 or worse seed.
Yeah. It's like
it is. That is way worse to me than what Virginia, because at least Virginia was like, oh wow, we really shit the bed, and then they won it all. Purdue was like, we shit the bed, and here's the sequel. here's the trilogy. It's like here's it's bad, man. Like it's bad.
If you had a reseed Purdue this year, what would you,
four seed?
Yeah, that sounds
4 seed. Like that's probably too harsh. Probably 2 or 3, but like, nah,
4's not really that bad, really, considering.
It's just I don't know. We need to start looking at sports like we did back in the day. Oh God, I've become everything I hated. Where we do too much of just looking at the record and looking at key wins, and we're not spending as much time looking at how they won and why they won. Because some types of winning is not sustainable, and Purdue is not. TC, I'm so glad you brought that up. Are they still in the tournament?
Nope, not anymore.
They
got to the second round, but that was about it. Or did they? Maybe they did win. Did they win?
Hold on.
Shit. I thought they lost.
Oh, no, they lost to Gonzaga.
Yeah.
God is good.
That's right. That was a good game, though. That was a really good game.
It was a good game because TCU lost. Go Gonzaga.
Well, speaking of things that you really love, the second round had some upsets, just not as many, but they were very eye-opening. The main one, what really shocked me was the fucking blowout that Princeton put on Missouri. It was like a 15-7, and they worked Missouri over. I didn't see that happen. I mean, I didn't even see Princeton being there, but that was just amazing. Like, I'm really kind of happy for these kids because this is something that's fun to watch. Something I will say, when we go back to Barkley's debate a little bit, when UMBC beat Virginia, they went on to lose quite a bit to, I think, who I forget who they lost to, but it was not close.
Yeah.
Princeton, however, followed up one upset with another, and I thought that was pretty impressive.
Fun fact: one of my old bosses at an Innocence Project that I worked at, she went to law school with a guy who was now high up in their athletic directorship suite. He might. I'd have to double check. He might actually be Princeton's athletic director. So I saw that on Facebook, and I was like, "Oh God, wow, small world."
Right.
Princeton and Yale, because Yale beat Kentucky, and the score made the game look much closer than what it was. They beat the piss out of us, and I was like, "Damn!" Like there are fluky wins, and sometimes guys get up, but I was like, "These freaking nerds can hoop! Like what is going on? Like what is happening here?" Some of these schools, some of these Ivy League schools are not to be trifled with. And the fact that it happened against Mizzou, it's just beautiful, baby. It's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, I like, this is what makes this tournament so fun because just anything can happen. And I remember so many years ago, again, I think Iowa State was actually the victim. I can't remember who it was that beat them, but I was listening on the radio while I was delivering at the time. And it was so exciting. It was like a 15 over a 2 or something, but either way, it was just so amazing. And I thought that's what sets this tournament apart a lot of times from a lot of sports because it's really open. Another one of the upsets that happened in the second round was Kansas went down to Arkansas. Like, again, tough game, close game.
No Bill Self.
Yeah, and you think that Kansas should still win that game, though.
Overcome adversity.
Right.
Didn't they win it all last season?
What's that?
Didn't they win it all last year?
Yeah, they were the defending champions. Yep. And then you had, which I don't know why, I always do this to myself. When you and I talked about it last episode, Tom Izzo, what he's done with Michigan State continues.
He's the best coach.
Blow my mind.
This team's this is a bad roster for him this year. He'd never say that, and he loves his guys.
But that's how it is. He always
takes
a team that's underachieving.
He's won with some pretty loaded rosters. Like no.
I get that. When he's got his best talent, he probably wins it all.
It's pretty.
But nasty. I'm always fascinated because during the regular season they can be the most average team.
I know. And
then they get in the tournament, and it's like they beat a couple
teams.
They
take you apart. He's different. Tom Izzo.
Yes.
Tom Izzo is a different breed. I have a lot of respect for him. I have a lot of respect for Bill Self as well. Both better head coaches than John Calipari. Anyway, the fact that he did it to that team made me happy. You just know the way to put it. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart that there were a couple games they didn't make up for the crippling loss that I felt, but they helped take some of the sting away. And that
Mhm.
was one of them.
This is one that kind of ruined both of our brackets. A little bit you more than me, but Miami over Indiana.
Yeah,
They look very good in that.
Indiana was a Final Four team for me. It's crazy because in that game they kind of showed why I believed them so much and believed in them so much, and then they also showed why I shouldn't have. They are a team. Like you always do this where you're like, if we could take that exact bracket and run it all the way over again, no one would take Princeton lightly. You know what I mean? All that stuff. You get I think, a markedly different result, right?
Mhm.
And I look at Indiana and I feel like if we could do this all over again, they'd go really far. But that's the nature of the beast. You don't get to do it. And while I do hate the Hoosiers because they duck Kentucky, and Bob Knight is a horrible person, one of the most overrated head coaches ever, and I say that with all my goddamn chest. I did think that they were going to go far, and they didn't, and that screwed up my bracket. But fuck them, it's still a beautiful thing. See, you can find beauty in
Well, that's
all of these
why I
moments.
kind of sit there and I said before this whole thing started, I said, Miami split with Virginia for the title of ACC champions, and then I'm like, how real are they? And so far, they're proving they're quite real. They're doing their job. They're getting out there, and they're playing, they're winning.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how far they'll go, but like this has been a pretty impressive run for them. So
If they can make the Elite Eight, that will do so much because people sometimes forget. We think of them as like a football school, albeit a
oh
kind
yeah,
of lapsed
yep,
one.
yep.
They have a little bit of tradition at basketball. That would a deep run would do a lot for that program. And with all that NIL money, there's a lot of rich donors. You don't know, like that'll be the other interesting thing.
Yeah.
Whew.
And then the last one for the second round was this is a team that I often like. I don't always follow them closely or anything. I don't know their players, but they always kind of seem to do things in a tournament. And even though they don't get as far as as they want to, Creighton over Baylor. I thought I actually picked that upset there as well. So they're one of those teams that always kind of reminds me a little bit of a younger version of Gonzaga a little bit. They have this way of like building their reputation in the tournament. And so uh they beat Baylor, who was a 3 seed, and
Yep. And I had Baylor going, and I had them going all the way up to playing Alabama. So I also had Creighton losing. I had Creighton losing to NC State. So
that's right. I remember that pick. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and yep. So fuck me. Like you proved me wrong. Like good on you. I don't know how anybody could be upset about that.
No, no, and it's part of the fun. Like, it's not like I have a gazillion dollars riding on this, thank God.
Yeah, and they're a program. They're always in it. They've been building something there for a while. They're a team where like if you play them early in the tournament, you shouldn't care what their seed is. Like
Right.
they're tricksy little hobbits.
Trixies. Smeagol.
My franchise.
All right, well, let's review the Sweet 16 now. In the South, speaking of Creighton, they are going to play Princeton, the darlings of the tournament so far. Now, this is where I had Arizona actually moving on in this game. They're just a nobody now. So, Creighton and Princeton, how do you feel about that game? Do you think Princeton, I think, should have a good shot actually of moving on in this game because they're just playing so good basketball right now? How do you feel about that matchup?
I'm gonna take Creighton.
Okay.
Um, I think Creighton is the better team. I know that they have more experience in general. Um, they probably have better players, to be honest. Princeton's definitely capable of beating them, but at a certain point, you have like a couple Cinderella stories almost every tournament, and then usually it just goes down to one, and usually it
Yeah.
gets snuffed out. So I'll take Creighton over Princeton.
Yeah, I think the one thing that could work in Creighton's favor is that now that Princeton's getting all these accolades and the praise and all this stuff, it might kind of go to Princeton's head a little bit. So if they're going to have a drop down game, it might be this one. If they get past Creighton, that could change their mentality a little bit, but then they're going to more than likely face Bama, and that's a nightmare for anybody. Speaking of Bama, they will be playing San Diego State. I had Bama winning this game regardless if Virginia got there or not.
San Diego State's really good, and they are it feels like ever since Kawhi played there, they've been, really a really strong college team or program. I have Alabama winning it all, and I'm not going to change that. But that I am more worried about this game than I would like to be. Just to be honest.
Well, it's funny because the tournament we're in with some other people from the social media, like there's probably a good 4 of them that picked Bama to win it all, including yourself. I think I'm like one of 2 people that picked Gonzaga, so it's going to be very interesting because if Gonzaga,
you should feel good about your pick.
No, I do,
Yeah.
and I, like I said, I thought that when it came, like I was surprised that I came up with Gonzaga being my champion because I'm like, I didn't really see them at first. Like I was thinking it would be somebody else, but their road getting there just seems a little bit easier to get there than somebody else. But okay, the Midwest. So now Houston's actually kind of playing very well. Like we talked about the injury to their one player. They were struggling a little early with Auburn, but then they pulled away at the end and showed that they have a pretty good supporting cast.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be playing Miami, the team that we just talked about. This is a game where, again, I can't take any away from Miami, but if they're really real for real, they could probably pull up the upset. I don't know, but we'll see. How do you feel about that one?
I feel like Miami is one of the worst teams for anyone to play right now. They didn't come in with a lot of hype. Their seed was pretty good, but they didn't come in with a lot of hype around them. The way that they play ball, they definitely believe they can win. They're absurdly talented. I will take Houston, but I do believe that when that game is over, it's possible that Houston might win by 7.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it'll be like a game where it's like they won by 7 because they're up by 3 or 4, and it was the free throws that got them there.
Yeah.
I expect that it will be close.
I think that Miami is probably the way they're kind of built, a little bit like Auburn. I think it's going to be a dogfight for a while. And it'll probably come down to 3 throws at the end to separate it. But granted, this game is the one where I had Indiana moving on. I think you did too. But
yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of a push for me here. Like I'm still not quite the believer in Houston. They probably should win as a number 1 seed. But in a way, I'm kind of pulling from Miami at this point because it doesn't matter that part of the bracket for me. So I'm kind of hoping that Miami can do another surprise here and see what happens. Xavier and Texas. I had Xavier moving on. I think you did too. But how do you feel about that matchup? Because I think we both had A&M there initially, but
yeah, I had A&M against Xavier. Yeah, I like Xavier a lot. They are their team that feels like I kind of view that they're kind of like in a similar spot to Gonzaga, where they're good. They have a tradition, tradition's not as good as Gonzaga. They have the coaching, they have the players, they don't have a lot of hype behind them. Sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's not such a great thing.
Right.
And they can beat anybody in the country. And sometimes they're the type of teams who can string together several tough wins in a row. I mean, Xavier is a legitimate threat to win it all this year. When you're talking about the 14 teams that could, they are firmly in there.
Yeah.
I feel like we kind of skipped over Texas, the shock that Texas got beat so early.
You mean A&M?
Yeah. So there'll be something to be said for how this game pans out, because Texas is a program they've been trying to build back up as a college program. And they're one of those teams that they're good every year, but
Yeah,
think that.
they're kind of like at a standstill, both with basketball and football. Because even football, they don't quite
Oh
live up to
God,
everything.
they're such a bad football program now. It's hilarious. I laugh at it every possible day. How the mighty have fallen. They haven't been shit since Vince Young left, and that's hilarious. But as a college basketball program, they remind me a lot of Ohio State about 8 to 10 years ago, where they would get these high seeds and these great recruits, and they had something of a tradition. And then every year they would get smacked down. They could never win a tough game. Um, and so I think it's a really big game for Texas. They had to fire their head coach for some not so. Hey, Suge, this is the dog. This is the glorious
The
dog.
dog.
All bow to the dog. Um, so it's not like if they don't win this game, you have to fire everybody and all that. But there is a sort of like we're kind of waiting. At least I am, to see what they're going to do.
Right.
Are they going to take that step forward, or are they always just going to be a nice regular season team?
Right. Okay, down in the West, you said Miami was kind of one of those teams that want to play. I got a feeling that Arkansas is the same way right now.
Boogeyman, they're a
Yeah,
boogeyman
and
team.
I have UConn moving on in this game, but I had them playing Illinois at that point. Of course, Arkansas beat them in the first round, so
Yes, they did.
this is a game again where I still think UConn can win it, but Arkansas kind of makes me paranoid a little bit here,
They are
especially because if they
tough
win
team.
this. And if Gonzaga wins their next game, they'll have to play Gonzaga, and that's another one that's going to have me worried.
Arkansas feels like a team of destiny, and if they win this game, then they're gonna feel like they can run through a brick wall. They
Yeah,
don't want to hear. They don't want to hear. Well, you beat Kansas and they didn't have their head coach. They're
right.
not trying to hear that. They beat Illinois. Illinois is kind of a mixed bag, but they were pretty good at
Yeah.
one point. They had a pretty solid ranking. Everybody had a solid ranking this year at
Mhm.
some juncture.
I mean,
I will. I
Virginia was
will
all the way up to 3 at one point.
I know. I will tell you this: the winner of this particular game, I would be on the lookout for, because if Connecticut wins,
Yeah,
then all of a sudden it's kind of like business as usual. Did you forget about us? You
yeah,
gave us a 4 seed. We probably could have been higher, and we're definitely better than Purdue. Like there's
yeah,
something.
baby.
Yeah.
And speaking of Gonzaga, they have to first get through UCLA. Still have them
Tough
moving on, of
team.
course. Does anything in this game change your mind about the way that the Bruins have been playing?
Bruins have been excellent. I was high on them coming into the tournament. I I can't lie. I have a hard time thinking that they're going to beat Gonzaga. But I do believe, looking at this bracket now, and I've been saving this take for all this whole time, that the winner of this game, Gonzaga UCLA, will be the one to face Alabama in the championship.
Certainly a possibility.
That's right. You heard it here first.
You heard it here, folks.
First, not after a ton of games and the busted bracket. Here first. Here first. Gonzaga or UCLA versus Alabama. The only one who called it right now.
In the East, Florida
Ugh.
Atlantic, who's kind of surprised a few people, even though they had to
Yeah.
play Fairleigh Dickinson, which is a pretty basic matchup. But that was a close game for that, too.
Yeah.
But they got to play Tennessee, even though I had Memphis at this point moving on. Tennessee is one of those teams, again, feisty, aggressive. If I had to pick one of these two, I'm going to think Tennessee is going to get through here.
I don't want to say it too confidently, because I was pretty confident about some of those picks last week that didn't turn out. But
Right.
Tennessee feels like they are a team who they feel like they're a team who has like some resistance to losing to a strictly inferior opponent. I feel like they're a team that's more at risk to losing to somebody who's closer, and sometimes they never play all the way down to a way less, a much lesser opponent. But there have been times where they play down to a slightly lesser opponent. So I do feel confident about Tennessee in this game. With that being said, if they lost, nothing shocks me. Like this was a year where nobody was really great, like a
Right.
truly dominant team, and that's kind of how the bracket's been going.
Yep. And then the final one in the East, Kansas State versus Michigan State. I had Marquette moving on in this game. But,
Izzo, baby.
It's funny because Michigan State, in some ways, we talked about earlier, they're kind of like Arkansas. They're kind of like UConn. It's like, are we getting the respect we need? We're a 10th seed or 7th seed coming in here. We just beat, Marquette, who is the number 2 seed, and so on and so on. But Kansas State's one of those teams, I think, that are very dangerous for anybody. Like, they're just one of those teams. And if Michigan State's going to lose, it might be this game because it just depends on which Kansas State team you get. But again, I wouldn't want to be Kansas State here because I'd be terrified.
Kansas State is a good team. They are good enough to beat Michigan State. They have the superior talent. They do not have superior coaching. Right. Okay. I feel like that's if that's a controversial take to anybody, I'm sorry you're wrong. What I saw from them in Kentucky versus Kentucky was they're a good team. They won't quit. They are prone to some boneheaded mistakes. However, so was Kentucky. And Kansas State won that game fair and square. It was a hell of a game.
Right.
It was a hell of a game. If they play that type of game against a Tom Izzo coach team, they will not win. They have to be not drastically better than what they were, but they have to be noticeably better than what they were versus Kentucky. I can only count on my hands a handful, not even a handful, maybe 1 or 2 times where Tom Izzo coach team in a big game was sloppy and bad and crappy, and that says a lot because how many freaking college basketball games are there? If Kansas State does win, it's going to be on the back of the superior athleticism and arguably the depth that they have.
Right.
And I will still take Tom Izzo. I will still take Michigan State. We won't get super political, but it is fair to remind people that it does feel like they are playing for something more because of that shooting on campus.
Right.
And sports has the power to heal people. It has the power to bring people together. And it can create an X factor. Now, I know everything I just said makes Jaded want to vomit. And I'm sorry, Jaded. However, you do vomit a lot, so I don't feel too terribly bad. With that being said,
you notice that motherfucker keeps poking the bear about Stetson Bennett, right?
That motherfucker, all he lives for is to poke the goddamn bear.
I posted that thing about
I saw
the rankings. I was talking about CJ Stroud being like the top guy, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that. And he's like, well, where's Stetson Bennett? I'm like, fuck you, Jaded. Fuck you in the big hole, okay?
He his response would be you. Like
yeah.
Shout out to beloved Jaded, the most beloved member of
I love that guy.
Love that guy. Fuck that guy.
Well, my final thoughts on Kansas State, Michigan State is this. I don't really know who to pick here. I will say that if Kansas State is on fire and they're playing even halfway decent defense, they will win. If this turns out to be a dogfight and it's close, Michigan State and the coaching will win. Kansas State cannot afford to let Michigan State hang around. They've got to get out to an early lead and keep going, because if you leave it even close at all, Michigan State just has that mentality, has the great coaching, and they will beat you. And I'll just leave it at that.
You got to pick one.
I'm not gonna do it to him again. I'm gonna pick Michigan State. Izzo's king. I can't pick against him. I should have known better when I went with Marquette. I just didn't learn. I never learn. And of course, now that I picked them, they're gonna fucking lose. Watch.
Yeah, we just cursed them. They're gonna get dubbed by 30, and we're just gonna feel awful.
Yeah, it's just how it is. It's my life. All right, so what final thoughts going into, because the next round start tomorrow? Or is it just Saturday and Sunday? I'm pretty sure it's tomorrow. Even though it's like later in the afternoon because of the
I
event.
know that they play on. I know there's some Friday games. There's some Thursday games,
Okay.
like Florida Atlantic versus Tennessee's on Thursday. Arkansas versus Connecticut's on Thursday. Um, I think Thursday seems to be when a lot of these games are kicking off. Thursday, Friday.
But they start like around 6 o'clock or something, because I think that was
Eastern time, I think. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so that's the only thing I hate usually. I usually love the early afternoon games because it gives me something to do, but I
I
have to
know.
wait till it rolls around in the evening.
I know. I have a lot of friends who take time off this time of the year for this.
I
When
took
they're
off
just
Sundays just for this.
they start saving up that PTO and some of it rolls over and all that.
Yeah.
So with that being said, who are you rooting for? Since your team's out, like who would you, if you could pick anyone to win the championship, who's in it? Who would you pick?
Oh man, it's tough, brother. Like I said, I picked Gonzaga, but it wasn't something that I really set my heart on.
Yeah.
I can get behind a Princeton or an Arkansas. Princeton, I just don't think the talent's going to be there to do it. But Arkansas has that mentality. I don't have a problem with Izzo at all. Like, I think they're a good story too. Uh, yeah, Arkansas is really probably, and I don't even know why, but just I'm really impressed how they beat Kansas. I didn't see it.
But they're so I've watched them. I watched them a lot in the SEC. They're tough, man. Like
Yeah,
if we were to reseed all of this, they ain't an 8. Like
right. Yeah,
they
I
ain't
mean,
an
but
8.
yeah, it's tough to do that sometimes as
Yeah.
the panel because
At a certain point, resume does come in. Like how many things can you go off of?
right.
What a lot of people in the
Miami's a good story too, but like
yeah.
they could
Well,
do anything, but it's
there
just
there are folks in the SEC who are saying our teams are underseeded because everybody thinks of us as a football conference, and look how many great teams we have.
right.
So,
Mhm.
there that'll be something for consideration. So
I
our
think if anything right now, I think as far as like the champion, whoever is going to be a champion is going to be champion, but I think it would be kind of cool. And I know you have Bama winning and all, but like I would love to see Bama lose just because I'd like to see a different team in the Final Four. But I would love to see like Creighton or Princeton in the Final Four, Arkansas, um, even UConn. Like I have really no problems with UConn, even though they would be beating Gonzaga to
UConn,
get there.
the UConn
Uh,
is tough. Gonzaga, Gonzaga's a team. They've been so close before. They're so tough.
yeah,
Um, what I will say is this: I'm rooting for. I like Tom Izzo. Also one of my best friends from undergrad, I'm still close with today. Works up on. He was on campus during that shooting.
hmm,
Um, so I'm rooting for Michigan State. I'm also rooting. I find myself. I like Gonzaga. I have no problem with Gonzaga. I have a lot of respect for UConn. I remember they had a tough game, championship game against the Wildcats and beat us, and I just walked away going, okay, all right, better team won. Like it was a good game, but um, I find myself being drawn to UCLA. They have such great history, and recently they've kind of been up and down. Like they've had some great moments and some bad moments. That's a really wonderful basketball program historically,
yeah.
and it's a part of the country that I tend to enjoy. I mean, I'm a Lakers fan, Dodgers fan. Um, I've kind of adopted them as like I wouldn't say a second team, but like a team that I follow half-assedly. So I like them. I
Well, to
am with
their
you.
credit,
I
no one's talking about them at all. So
and they're good. They've been good all year.
yeah,
But I am with you on Arkansas. There's something with and I will say this too. Like I'm pretty agnostic about Alabama. I came to the conclusion that they're a great team. I think they'll be healthy. I
yeah,
do really like their coach. Arkansas and Miami are also interesting to me as well.
mhm,
Because they play interesting basketball, they play spirited basketball. And I'm not a Cinderella guy who's like, oh, 15 seed, 16 seed, but I do find a lot of charm and some of those teams where it's like, look, man, it's a tough roster this year, 1 through 64, 1 through 16. Arkansas could argue, some years, yeah, we would be an 8 seed, and some years we would be a 6 seed, and we're better than what our seed is. And so could Miami. Obviously, they have a different seed. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of charm to this tournament. I thought that it was going to be something like, if Kentucky loses, I don't care, and I only watch so we can, do this. And I don't, like the Kentucky loss hurts, and I'm pissed. I'm big pissed. Fire Calipari. But there is something that can be said for this tournament.
Yeah, I like it. The upsets are all cool. It's what makes this tournament special. I can sit there and laugh at Purdue all along, but then I have to realize that I lost to Furman, and I'm just like you. It's just like I'm not really pissed anymore because I'm just kind of used to it by now. But it's just like one of those things I keep saying. It's like for once in my life, it doesn't matter. Like I've always said to myself, if Virginia gets to the tournament and they get to the Sweet 16 or Elite 8 and still lose, I'm still happy with that.
Yeah.
I just wish we did that more often. We just don't. And that's the kind of thing that sucks about the Virginia program right now is we don't shock people as much as we probably should. And maybe it's because we're always ranked so high. I don't know. But either way, it's still a lot of fun. I have fun with the sport. I love doing this with you and talking sports and talking stuff like this.
It's great. And it's also, it's so hard. Like, I remember my dad's a huge college basketball fan. And he talked about how like he used to keep his brackets, and he used to say to humble me. But he did better at picking games when he first got into it than when he became a diehard fan.
I think I did too, actually.
Because the tournament's so random. Because when you're really
now I try to fucking overthink everything.
I'm looking
at stats and defense
and for me, the part of the charm is there are people who do well mostly every year. So it's not like it's just like a skillless, nonsensical, you're not playing roulette where it's just you roll the dice and you're just picking a number or whatever. The upsets are so tough. I think that what I remind myself a lot of is that now more than ever for most years, the difference in talent between a 1 seed and a 16 seed is much smaller than it's ever been. I'm not saying there's not a big difference.
No.
I'm not saying that.
I totally agree, because when you look at college football, I was thinking it while you were saying this, the Appalachian State Michigan scenarios rarely happen.
But
at the college level, like basketball, it's far different. Because
and for Appalachian, I'm glad you brought that one up, because it's Appalachian State, like they're the ones who do it. And if you look at and I'll take it a step further, the difference in talent between a 4 seed and an 8 seed. Now, sometimes you have teams who they're super talented and they underachieve. Throw that out. Like, I know that scenario exists. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but for sake of argument, throw that out. Like a true blue 4 seed and a true blue, 8 seed. It's smaller than it ever has been before. And there's something to be said for a sport like that. And, one of the reasons why, like, for the Fire Calipari meme, I don't actually, it's related. I don't actually mean it. I think he's a good coach. I think that he needs to realize that in the era of offense, Calipari he's a guy who'd rather win 4-2 than 16-8.
Wasn't Calipari, I mean, my memory always gets shaky. He was with UMass for a long time.
Yes,
right?
he was. And then he went to Memphis.
Right.
When Derrick Rose was playing and they lost against Kansas, that crazy game, that was his team.
Who was the big guy he had at UMass?
Marcus Camby.
Yes, there you go.
They lost to Kentucky, ironically. Yeah. They got slapped by one of the best teams that was ever assembled. And then Kentucky had a run for their money against Boeheim against Syracuse, and they were like a 6 or 7 and 8 seed because coaching fucking matters. But with a guy like Calipari, there's something to be said for the tournament's tough, and just because you have great recruits doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you're entitled to anything, you're going to win anything. But there is something to be said for understanding that the game has changed, and there's a CBS article that encapsulated perfectly, and I think it speaks to what this tournament has become, or maybe has been for a while. Calipari would rather win 4-2 and grind you out with rebounding and defense. And rebounding and defense will always matter. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but it's better to have a team that could win 16-8 because you have more variance there. If I'm
Right.
consistently getting the 16, whether that represents 80 points or 70, whatever, it doesn't matter, and I'm holding you to much less than that, I have more wiggle room when things don't go right or teams punch up and they play better than what they normally should. The problem with Calipari's way of play is because there's so many great teams now. Like 15 years ago, Gonzaga and Villanova weren't getting the recruits that they're getting now.
Right.
Programs like that, and to a lesser extent, Xavier and teams like that, they're getting much better players now than they used to. So there's less of a monopoly on talent. You look at college football. Nick Saban's trick was, I'm going to take this left tackle and this right guard, these offensive linemen and these defensive linemen, who are going to be eventual first round picks. I don't play them for 2 years, but I have them for depth, and you don't have them. Well, you can't do that as much now with
Right.
NIL.
Right.
And what he's facing down is now it's not just him and Clemson and all that, and the SEC has always had tough teams, but you look at the NIL money and Texas, especially Texas A&M, with all the cash they're throwing around, they're getting players. And USC,
Yeah,
Jesus God,
you see a lot of transfers. Like they're just like
it's
some
different.
players don't want to sit on a bench because they feel like they're starter material.
Yeah,
And I
and a
forget
lot
who
of them
it
are.
was this past weekend. Like one player was part of a team, might have been Kentucky. Then he went to play for another team.
Yeah,
And
it,
as the starter in that, I think it wasn't Kentucky, but he lost on the team that he's with now. But
yeah,
he's probably
wasn't part of
happier
that team.
because he's a starter.
They're a starter, and people get mad at these kids for it. But it's like, if you got a shot at going pro,
Right.
that, like, I mean, come on, it's a bit like, I don't have as big of an issue with the NIL as I thought I was. I think they're gonna have to keep some of the money in line, because, like, I think there's a kid, I think it's for Miami. His NIL deal was reportedly worth $800,000, and he had his agent tell. It was reported. I don't know if it's true, but it was reported that he had his agent tell the coach that he's either going to play more minutes or he's leaving next season because he's worth $800,000. So it's different. But here's the deal: the flip side of that was Nick Saban going, well, yeah, I can tell a kid that if he's transferring, he can't go to Georgia or any school that I'm going to face again. And if you don't like that, change the rules. Well, the rules changed. The NCAA screwed up. And they screwed up years and years and years. And then it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court gave them that work and said you had all these decades to find something that worked. And if you had a framework that made any modicum of sense,
Yeah.
we wouldn't be here. So, I don't know. Like, it might turn into something where you see these crappy schools that are not, like, in terms of college sports. I'm not saying institution wise, who aren't historically all that great, but they have, like, Vanderbilt has some of the biggest donors around.
Right.
Vanderbilt is not very good at anything except college baseball. No one gives a fuck about that, except like 6 people. So maybe Vanderbilt's going to start making it rain, and all of a sudden they start hooping. And you know
Yeah.
what? I don't necessarily like that, and that'll be a wrinkle for the tournament. But that'll just add on again to how things change and how tough the tournament can be.
Question, real quick before we get out of here. Do you keep up with like gaming?
Yeah.
I noticed that even though Madden football still exists, college football does not. Is that because of the whole like
Yeah.
name rights and all that stuff?
Yeah, there was if memory serves, the reason why it fell apart was there was some legality that basically said that, like, it might have been a court case or something, that these players are entitled to profits from their name, image, and likeness.
Likenesses, yeah.
And then NCAA said, nope, not doing that, even though that game made them so much money.
Yeah, I used to
Um,
love the shit out of that game. Like
it
but I'm
was a good
surprised
game.
you can't find them. Like they don't
It's
make them anymore.
They
So
they just gutted it. I mean, the for a little bit, last little bit of bashing the NCAA because it's such a fucking archaic and shitty institution. They chose to stand on their high horse and not flex and be flexible and not try to meet anybody halfway. And now, 5 years from now, we might be looking at the NIL thing and think that it's a whole new can of worms, or it might be even worse than what we had. And it might be. I don't know. I can't see the future. But if it is, I'm not blaming the players, and I'm not blaming the agents or the lawyers for doing their job. You put this on the NCAA because they had all these decades, all this money, all this time to theoretically try stuff, put it out there, and then change it.
Yeah, well, I mean,
This is where we're at. It's where
the
we're
ones
at.
that are in control. They're all. It's so weird because they don't want to pay the kids, which on some level I get it, but at the same time, you're making billions of dollars,
Off of them.
right?
Off of
And
them.
so, like, you remember when they first started in the playoffs in football? Like, I don't think they were really crazy about that because it took some of the momentum away from the bowl games. So now, of course, they're going to expand the playoffs, which is a good thing again because we're dealing with the whole like, well, who's
It
deserves to
takes
be
care of a
there,
lot of problems, and at
right?
this,
But I
if
just the NCAA, yeah, I think they just kind of shoot themselves in the foot and they make
they are
themselves look like idiots.
I have never seen an institution stumble and bumble around. And like, to me, because I used to be like, I grew up with a father who his education pulled him out of a destitute country. Okay, so to me, I was like,
Right.
well, you get to go for college. Like, that was like the mecca. I got a little bit older and I was like, it's maybe not so much the mecca now for socio-political reasons that are immaterial here, right? And then it just got to the point I'm like, there's just too much money being made. There's just too much money being made, and then there's too many players who they don't have enough scholarship money, or like whatever the deal is, to get a meal program to eat 3 times a day. And like, some of these guys are like UConn players, for when they won the championship. One of their best players was a guy who was like, I've played games hungry because we don't get fed 3 times a day, and I'm broke. Everybody knows I'm broke. Like,
Yep.
and or that's you can take it back to who was that Ohio State quarterback who they didn't suspend him for the bowl game because it would have ruined the bowl game? Terrell Pryor.
Yes.
It was Terrell Pryor.
Yes.
He had the audacity to trade in OSU gear that he legally owned. They gave it to him for tattoos. What a monster. But they're like, we can't suspend you for the playoffs because you'll get absolutely wrecked and rolled. So you'll serve part of that suspension then and then later and all that. It was so
Yeah,
two-faced.
I get so mad at that. I'm like, you're not really teaching any lessons there. You're saying, okay, we got to make sure it's a good game, so the best players got to be there, unless of course they're not star players. Then we'll just
Yeah.
like,
If you're a scrub, and then you look at what they cost Des Bryant when he was in college, the 8 games or the 6 games that he was suspended, and that haunted him throughout the entire draft prospect. Like, I mean, it. I take all this and I circle back to college basketball because I do think that it will be a sport that can survive some of these schools are getting the top recruits because it's always been that way, and there's just so many teams that can recruit that it kind of diffuses that problem a little bit. Maybe
right.
it'll be a bigger problem in college football, but I think that the joy and the love of this tournament is going to just stay on. I mean, it's just so entertaining.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck me. I need a new coach. Anyway, with that, I'm done ranting and raving.
Well, thank you, Mr. Poet, for joining me. I am
Thank you for
DJ
having me.
Anubis. For those following us, Friday is my Godzilla Bash birthday party live. We'll start at 5 p.m. Eastern. And me and a few other panel guests will be breaking down all 33 live Godzilla films, ranking them in our own personal list, how we feel about them, and talk a little bit about them. So come hang out in the chat. Maybe I'll see Poet there a little bit.
And show this man love. He's the hardest working man on the internet. If you don't show him love, if you don't support him, I'm going to break into your house. I'm going to eat your food. I'm going to break into your bathroom. I'm going to crap in your toilet and your bathtub. And I'm not going to flush or clean up after myself. If you don't want this problem, support this man.
Gonna leave
Support
turd
this man.
burglars.
Support this man. I'm about it.
Thank you all. We'll be back next week to break down the next round of March Madness for you all.
We can go over my shitty bracket again and see how intrinsically incorrect I am.
And we may even start throwing in some more football because we do have some football stuff going on. So be ready, be looking for that. And thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Poet. And see you all later. Keep it metal. And
keep
talk
it
to you
metal.
soon.
And shout out to Sugar, the best dog in the world.
Sugar. Later.
You see me for you